Welcome back to Life's Challenge. My name is Avital, and this week's Parshat is Parshat Beshalach. And Parshat Beshalach continues in the narrative that we saw in last week's Parshat in Bo, where the Jewish people have just left Egypt. They've just left Egypt. And in this week's Parsha opens up with Pharaoh having major regret that he let the Jewish people go. Because if you think about it, he now had all of these people, everybody who was a slave in Egypt. They were building pyramids, they were providing crop, they were doing all of the things. And now all of a sudden, Pharaoh's realizing hey, who's gonna do that now? And so he has regrets, and he rallies an army, and he decides that they're gonna pursue the Jews, and they're gonna bring them back. Because really, how is he gonna operate this great nation that Egypt was without the slaves who had been doing all of the work? And so Pharaoh does that. He goes after the Jewish people, and we have the very famous splitting of the sea in this week's Parsha. Essentially, the Jewish people arrive at the sea, and God causes a great wind to come and split the sea so that the Jewish people could cross through on dry land. And once they're out on the other side, and Pharaoh and his army are trying to come through the water as well, the waters crash down on them, and that's the end of that army who was chasing after the Jews. And so the Jews see this great miracle that God performed, and they sing the Song of the Sea, which we recite every day during our prayer service, thanking God basically for the great miracle that they just witnessed before their eyes. And the Parsha tells us, it says that the Jewish people, it says that they had faith in God and in Moses, his servant. And so that's a very beautiful thing that we see. And then really reality begins to hit for the Jewish people of what life is going to be like in the desert. They don't have food every day. That they were trying to figure out where they're going to get their food from. They're hungry and they're thirsty. Where is their water going to come from? In Egypt, they just had these things available. These are not people who are used to, doing that kind of work for themselves. And God, as I spoke about in years past, you can see the video linked below, God provided manna for the Jewish people, which was a sustenance that would show up basically on their doorstep every single morning for the 48 years that they were in Egypt. And it really, again, added to this trusting in God that the Jewish people had to have. And the Parsha ends with the Jews going up to battle against Amalek, the nation of Amalek, which was a great nation, and that we see a couple battles with Amalek in the Torah, and we're supposed to never forget what they did to the Jewish people and all of these things. So we have the first battle of the Jewish people are facing with another nation upon leaving Egypt. But what's interesting about it is that by the end of this Parsha, again, the Jewish people are engaged in battle with Amalek. But the very first lines of the Parsha are as follows. It says, "It happened when Pharaoh sent out the people, that God did not lead them by the way of the land of the Philistines, because it was near. For God said, perhaps the people will reconsider when they see a war, and they will return to Egypt. So God turned the people towards the Sea of Reeds." So the Parsha opens basically with saying, if the people see war, if they see a battle, if they have to go and fight right now, they're going to go back to Egypt. They're going to be too afraid. This is going to be too much for them to handle. And so I'm going to take them the long way around, even though going to the land of the Plishtim, the Philistines, would be closer. I'm going to take them a long way around because this would be too much for them right now. They cannot handle right now going up to battle. But by the end of the Parsha, they could handle it. And as I was reading the Parsha, what really struck me is something my dad always would tell me as a kid. When I would come up with something that was challenging, my dad would always say, God's not going to give you anything that you can't handle. Meaning that is exactly what's happening here with the Jewish people. They had just left Egypt, where they had been enslaved for hundreds of years. They were not ready. It was too much to handle for them to just leave Egypt and go right into battle. That would have been so overwhelming and way too much for them, and God recognized that. And so God sent them on a circuitous route, a longer journey, in order so that they wouldn't have to go through that event. So that would have been too much for them. And I think that is such a powerful message, because in our own lives, there will often be times when we feel overwhelmed, when we feel like the challenge that we have facing us is too great, it's too much, and we don't know what to do about it. But seeing this right here, it adds on to that idea that my dad said of that God won't give you anything that you can't handle. Meaning that if we are in this circumstance right now, it's because God believes that we have the tools and everything that we need to be able to navigate the situation successfully. And again, it didn't happen for the Jews. Sometimes we might wonder why we're on this long, weird route in our lives, but it's probably just a detour getting us to that destination that God thinks like that we need more preparation for. It's a really beautiful and inspiring message to take to heart. And here's that Torah source for what my dad always told me, but it's a very beautiful message to take to heart of God not giving us something that we can't handle, and that God led the Jews on this long journey because they weren't ready for battle. But by the end of the Parsha, they had the tools and everything they needed, and so God was like, okay, you weren't ready then, but you are ready now, you can handle it. And I think that with that, I hope that we all can learn from that and really take that to heart. So I wish you all a wonderful week and a Shabbat Shalom, and I look forward to speaking with you next time.